Thursday's pod was full of praise for City's performance against Real Madrid, which is one of the best performances of our time, really. And that, combined with winning the Premier League title again, just shows that it's a club that makes a lot of smart decisions. We'll come on to the money, Sam, but their decisions are smart ones made by smart people.
Absolutely. I think maybe that's why, the whole topic of the podcast today, obviously it's a talking point, but I do feel that because the team are so good, and also not just good and technically brilliant, but consistent and do it year after year, whereas other teams don't do that. They're only the fifth team in English football history to win 3 in a row. I just think people see that and don't always appreciate the hard work that can go into that. Again, in terms of these talking points, we'll obviously come on to them, but when they were mentioned on Match of the Day at the weekend, Gary Lineker threw to Alan Shearer, and Shearer was like, well, the players have still had to go out there and do it on the pitch. And I feel like that's it's not the view that you see on Twitter. I think the Twitter view is, what about these charges? It's unfair. But I think the more kind of, I don't know, the professional view is in terms of footballers. I think they kind of see the other side of it. And regardless of what's going on, and we will come to that, to be able to do that on the pitch, to be consistent, to be brilliant, and all this kind of stuff is almost a separate matter. But I think for us in the media and as fans, it's harder to separate that. And you see the brilliance and the smart decisions, but you just think, well, they're so good. There's these allegations. It must be cheating. I don't think people can separate those things. But I think that's because of generally a lack of understanding. But obviously, I get why. I get why there's question marks around the team. Obviously,
do you think even some of their smart decisions, people then question how they've, even the signing of Haaland.
Well, whether example, exactly.
That's the prime. It's a prime example, isn't it? That whatever they paid for him, however they got him, you only have to go again on social media to see people questioning how they managed to do that. I mean, every smart decision, people seem to think there's another reason behind it.
Yeah, well, it's the same as on the pitch. You beat Real Madrid 4-0, and you go, well, that can't be right. That can't be legit. And it's the same as the smart decisions, because it's almost the Guardiola curse. I think we've mentioned this on the Athletic Football podcast before, but kind of the better he does, the easier he makes it look. And therefore, all these titles that he's won in his career, not just at City, but at other clubs as well, it's like, okay, well, yeah, it must be easy managing these top clubs then, because he wins all the time. And then, yeah, whether it's signing Haaland or whatever else. And look, when it blurs into the money side of things and the wages side of things, which obviously relate to a lot of these charges, we'll see. We'll see how that goes in the future. But yeah, when it comes to the decision making, you just go, oh yeah, well, it can't just be good decision making, because you look at Chelsea yesterday, for example, with more money spent obviously over this season, but similar amount spent over the years, and United as well, and you see glaring examples that having money doesn't guarantee good decisions. And you can kind of say that until you're blue in the face, really.
Just on clubs having lots of money and spending it and referring to smart decisions, I didn't see Chelsea or Manchester United or, well, you could throw anybody else in for a Kanji, for example. Adam?
No, but Man City don't stand accused of, not making good decisions. I think that's, and they don't stand accused of not having a sensational coach, and they don't stand accused of not having a brilliant group of players at this moment in time. So I think it's possible to, at the same time, as part of all of the same conversations, to say they have the best coach in the world, possibly the best coach I've ever seen in my lifetime, the best group of players. I think you probably have to, I would say personally, say that's someone who grew up supporting a different team to Manchester City. But that's not what Manchester City are being accused of by the Premier League. Manchester City also aren't being accused by the Premier League of, this term sports washing that people talk about a lot. That is basically a Twitter debate. What they are accused of is over a decade, over 100 breaches of Premier League rules. And I think you can separate those things at the same time, while also recognizing that some of the success that they've been able to have under Pep Guardiola and some of the infrastructure that they've been able to implement and some of the players that they've been able to bring in may, depending on what these charges prove or if not are cleared, have had an impact on what they are now doing.
Just go through then. Go through, because we keep going on about the charges. Just go back to what they're accused of, Adam.
We're not doing all 115, are we?
No, I don't know. No, the one. I don't want you to go through it charge by charge.
No, so in essence, it's a kind of a decade-long period between 2009 and 2018. Breaches of the Premier League's financial rules. It's things such as not providing accurate financial information, particularly in relation to sponsorship revenue, and that kind of all goes back to when the Manchester City takeover happened, and also around the time that PSG were acquired by Qatar as well. It coincided with this period where UEFA brought in financial fair play regulations. And these financial fair play regulations, if you believe this version, were originally designed as a way to stop overspending so that you end up with clubs going out of business or coming close to that. So whether it was a Leeds or a Portsmouth, and there were other cases across Europe, loads of clubs racked up loads of debt, and it was seen as unsustainable. So it was, in essence, trying to introduce an idea of you spend what you bring in with a certain amount of leeway over a set period of time. But this kind of collided with Man City and PSG coming in and hugely ambitious owners. And not just Man City, PSG. You could talk about Leicester and Brighton's owners who wanted to invest, lots of people who wanted to invest in football. And basically, City and PSG wanted to move faster, probably, at that time, than maybe some of those regulations were originally set out to intend. And as a result of that, this is where the big question is, did they disguise sponsorship revenues? Did they disguise owner investment as sponsorship revenues during that time? So when you saw all those Abu Dhabi sponsors come into Manchester City, the question was, were these sponsorships genuine, or were they being topped up by the owner of Manchester City through his investment fund, obviously Sheikh Mansour, the owner? So those were part of the charges. Then you've also got failures to disclose managerial payments when Roberto Mancini was the manager. But then there's also allegations of failing to comply with UEFA's FFP, going right into the Guardiola era as well. So although it only goes into 2018, this does go into the Guardiola era. So it's wrong to say it is purely historic. So when we say why do people sometimes not talk about that? Probably because the last 90 seconds was a bit boring, a bit dry, and a bit technical, and not that fun, right? Like that's the reality of it.
Do you think that's why, Sam? Do you think that's why it's not talked about?
But it's talked about, isn't it?
Mm.
Well, it depends, Sam, who we're talking about here. So I think there's different
We're doing it now again.
No. But we're talking, I think it's fair to say, sort of written media, podcasts, I think are in a different place at the moment to ex-players, current managers, current chief executives, owners. There is almost this kind of, I think from ex-players, and it's more of the football is almost so poetic, so beautiful, that to them, because they've been there on the pitch and know how difficult that is to produce, there is almost this feeling of like impoliteness and disrespectfulness, disrespect, I should say, if you then go out and criticize something that's unrelated to the players. I think there's a little bit of that going on from ex-players. I think it's because they know it's separate. They've been in those situations. Like some of the players who have been at City before, at the period when this was alleged to have been going on, they're like, well, if it was, they didn't know anything about it. Certainly the ones I've spoke to or heard about didn't know anything about it. And they know that they've still gone and done their job regardless, whether they've won trophies, whether they haven't, whether they've been a big part of it, whether they haven't. And again, other players mentioning Alan Shearer on Match of the Day the other day, I think there is that side of it where, look, it's a completely hypothetical situation, but let's say they are found guilty of however many charges, and we'll be talking about tarnished legacies and all that kind of stuff. And I'll be right there as well. But there will be players who have been involved and not even at City,
but know that it's a slightly separate thing. And like even if the playing field has been skewed illegally, almost to go out and play that well and that consistently is almost entirely separate. So I think that ties into what you're saying now in terms of why it's not discussed. But then you go back to the World Cup, and they're awkward conversations to have. And so in terms of broadcasters, like the BBC and ITV did a very good job up until kickoff at the World Cup to talk about the wider issues in Qatar. But then as soon as the football starts, we talk about the football. And I think that's just a very similar thing. Like they're awkward conversations. Maybe it's a British thing. We're not used to having them. We're not used to having them brilliantly. But I think that's it's whether it's sport or whatever in England, we don't talk about awkward things with people's families or marriages or whatever. We don't talk about awkward stuff. But
I also think it's incredibly multi-layered. It's incredible. There are an inordinate amount of grey areas in all of this. There's a huge mistrust of football organizations, not just by City fans, but I think by the majority of fans. And you talk, Adam, about why UEFA brought these rules in the first place to stop clubs going broke. Well, I think a high proportion of football fans would view UEFA as bringing these in because the old establishment didn't want to be rocked by new people coming in. And I also think what's quite interesting, even in this last season, is that on the one hand, and I realize we're talking regulations here, and regulations are different, but there is an element of, I think within the media, people come in throwing money at a football club, particularly at the elite level. Oh, you can't buy success, blah, 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 on the one hand. And then on the other hand, these same organizations, we're doing it, lauding Wrexham. Now, Wrexham haven't broken any. There aren't the same regulations in the National League. But what Ryan and Rob have done at Wrexham is it has distorted the National League, actually, because they've got players who are on 7 times the wages of some of the other clubs. And so I think the whole sport at times can be tied up in hypocrisy.
Of course it can. But I kind of would go back to what I said at the start. What your point around FFP, was it designed to protect clubs? Was it designed to protect clubs? Was it designed to stop clubs breaking into the elite and challenging the elite? Now, you can have that argument forever. And I think it's a very fair one, because I think there was a point, certainly, even if you take the view it was unintended, that the consequence was that it would have locked out clubs from challenging. But it still remains the case that if Manchester City thought those rules were unfair and wrong, make the argument, challenge it, overturn it. Don't sign up to a set of rules and then hypothetically breach them. Now, obviously, they deny doing that. So I think that the original point, the point you make is absolutely fair, but it doesn't change the facts that Man City signed up to rules. And I think you're absolutely right about the hypocrisy as well. I mean, like the idea that the Premier League is all of a sudden possibly in this future world where City could be could be found guilty, tainted. I mean, Chelsea have won 18 major trophies during a period in which a sanctioned pal of Vladimir Putin loans £1.6 billion to the club, right? So if the Premier League is tainted by Manchester City, then what on earth was it by Chelsea being that successful? What was it by, Newcastle's ownership? So this idea that the moral drawbridge that we have is a little bit of potentially iffy accounting, I think is a difficult thing, I think, for a lot of people to get their heads around. But it doesn't change the fact that they were the regulations that Man City signed up to.
We ought to say as well at this point, Sam, City are adamant and confident in everything that they have done.
Well, this is my point. Like, it's a conversation to be had when there's a verdict. I was exactly the same with when they were banned from the Champions League, because City obviously always said they would appeal it, and I was like, well, okay, well, let's see how it goes. And obviously, when they were banned from the Champions League, we had all the this is terrible. This should happen. This should happen. What a disgusting organisation. And look, I would have been the same had CAS threw out their appeal. But all I wanted to do was wait until we knew. Like these are conversations to be had whenever we get a verdict. And I know that's uncomfortable. I know some fans don't like it. It's almost as if, and look, City are obviously, according to that story in the Times last week, trying to fight it and maybe delay it, even getting to the point where there is arbitration on it. Which again, that doesn't look good. You know, if you're already starting from a point of view where you believe City are guilty, which I would say is the vast majority of people, then seeing them delaying it reportedly based on the fact partly that the guy chairing it is an Arsenal fan, then that's not going to look good. And obviously City are trying these tactics, and they have tried these tactics previously. But I mean, also, as well as waiting for the verdict, and I've got an open mind about it, but also the noises coming out of the club, and not just the kind of front-facing, everything's going to be okay kind of version, but the internal version was everything's going to be okay from a City point of view. So you think, well, first of all, I'm going to wait anyway, because why have these conversations about? Because again, the whole asterisk debate. Surely there's an asterisk if they're proven guilty. There's doubts now. I get why there's doubts. I get why we're having the conversation. But until there's guilt, there's no asterisk. And if there is, then there's more than an asterisk, because then we'll get into the potential punishments. But until then, I mean, I can't say I don't see the use in having the conversation, because I'm having it now. And I know why it needs to be referenced. And look, I know there's City fans who weren't even happy with the fact it was mentioned on Match of the Day. Of course you got to mention it on Match of the Day. Of course you got to mention it in articles. It's there, but I don't think you can develop on it too much, because we saw with the Champions League ban, we have all these conversations about, they've done this, they've done that. And then it goes to CAS and they go, okay, well, and even the way someone that's been reported in the years since, there's a lot of kind of innuendo about being time barred, and the elements of the investigation, the UEFA investigation, which were time barred because it happened more than 5 years ago, so they couldn't be looked at again. And it was like, okay, well, in that sense, it's been said City got away with it on a technicality, but there was other things that weren't time barred, and it was found there was no evidence for. But I do feel that I try and look at these things coldly, but I do feel like people talk more about the time barred element than the no evidence element. And you think, we'll never know. We'll never know what would have happened with the time barred stuff, but we do know what happened with the other stuff. And it would be easier to go, okay, well, there was no evidence of that. But people don't normally do that. People normally say, okay, well, it was time barred and they got off on a technicality. And you think, what's the reason for that?